Okay, hi, welcome everyone. When we scheduled this event, it's maybe good to mention before we start, we didn't realize that this would be the Thursday before Easter. And I think that's why a lot of people are already on their way home to their parents, or I don't know what. But well, we'll just go forward with this event. Very welcome that you're here. My name is Annelieke Koster. I'm a program manager at 𝙉ele here at Tilburg University. And this is my colleague Hanna van den Bos, who's also a program manager at 𝙉ele. We'll present this event together. What else can I tell you? That we're recording this event. So feel free to have questions, remarks during this event, but wait for the mic because otherwise we can't record your voice. Yeah, I guess that's it for now. Have a good afternoon. I'll give the floor to Hanna.
Yes, I will take over. My name is Hanna. And let's move to today's topic. Because today, it's not just a symposium, because we're going on a journey. It's not just any journey, we are traveling to a whole kind of new destination, and that is digital worlds. These are digital spaces where the lines between the real and the virtual are blurred, especially when you're wearing a VR headset. And they are places to work, to learn, to play, to socialize, to shop, and maybe even reinvent yourself. It's an exciting world, but it also brings a lot of questions. Who is building it? And how to pay for things that are virtual? Can you actually own something that's only virtual? And what about privacy and real-life connections? In this program, 3 researchers from Tilburg University will help us explore these questions and these new worlds. Let's call them our expert tour guides today. And they will share how to prepare, what places you should visit and what places you should not visit, what to watch out for, and how to travel these new spaces responsibly. And then it's time to introduce our first speaker. It's Annelieke Mooij. She is assistant professor at the Department of Public Law and Governance. And I think you can...
Forget the video that we wanted to show.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'm sorry.
Sorry, and I should speak in the mic as well. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm already moving to introducing the speakers, but we wanted to show you a video to also give an insight into what we are talking about today. And then I give the floor back to Annelieke.
Yeah, so as Hanna told us, we are going on to explore the virtual world. And I like to share this video with you, which is a video of someone, an example of someone who visits Horizon Worlds, which is a creation of Meta, which is Mark Zuckerberg, behind it. And maybe not the most popular virtual world at this moment, but what it shows very well, I think, is the things that we want to discuss today. How to explore a virtual world, how to wander around, what you find there, how to find your way in how to behave, what language is spoken, etc. So I felt it's worth to share this experience with you. So this was, as I said, this was just one example. I've been told that there are concerts at the Roblox virtual world that are really popular, of real artists that have virtual reality concerts, and you, with your avatar, can jump around them and come close to the artist, but well, in virtual reality, of course. For now, this, I think, as an introduction was okay. Hanna, to you.
Yeah, so now it is time to introduce our first speaker. That's Annelieke Mooij. She is an assistant professor at the Department of Public Law and Governance, and she looks at how we can regulate fast-changing technology, especially in the financial world. And I think you can introduce more of yourself as well. Please, an applause for Annelieke Mooij.
Thank you. So lovely to see you all. My name is indeed Annelieke. And I'm going to be talking today about regulating democratic discourse in the metaverse. Now, if you have any questions, please let me know. Just feel free to shout or interrupt. And so first of all, let's talk a little bit more about definition of metaverse, because not everyone agrees on what is the metaverse. And in my definition, the one that I use, metaverse is the governing structure on top of which virtual worlds are built. So you just saw one of these virtual worlds, which is Meta Horizon. It's not the most popular, but it is very advanced. But you have multiple worlds. Roblox, which indeed hosts very, very popular concerts. Millions of people actually go to these concerts, so it's not popular in like 5 people, but it's millions. Minecraft, Decentraland, you have multiple providers of platforms. And we see that the diversity especially is growing. So you saw in the video as well, he went to a bar where he hung out, he started talking to some people, but he also went to a gaming and a recording studio. And that is something that's very different about metaverse now compared to, say, about 10 years ago, virtual environments. Because about 10 years ago, it was all or primarily about gaming. And in gaming, there were already some questions about, okay, what do we do with finance? Some games like Fortnite were being used on a high scale for money laundering. There were some questions in the chat, especially against LGBTQ people. So there were some small questions. Now with Metaverse, all these questions are actually amplified. So we see that more social interactions take place. As you could see in the video as well, he started talking to a few random strangers. Some people even had a fight. They were arguing about something. And that actually raises the question, well, if we have social interactions on this metaverse, so on these virtual environments, what does it mean for democratic discourse? And that's something that I'm going to be talking today with you, hopefully. So please, again, if you have questions or comments, just shout. What is democratic discourse in metaverse and how do we guarantee an effective functioning? So we've already seen with some platforms, some 2D platforms, that there are issues. I'm sure you're familiar with the German elections and with the US elections. They recently had elections. And the power of these big tech industries was huge. So the influence and the impact they can have on determining the outcome of an election is big. And that is something that we see in the metaverse. Yeah, we have a clicker. Excellent. As a challenge, how do we ensure that we can have a proper debate, proper talks with each other, like the ones we have here, in a regulated fashion? Yes, lovely. So what is democratic discourse? Well, there are many definitions, many aspects to it. And today I'm going to be talking about 3 important fundamental rights, which is freedom of thought, freedom of opinion, and the freedom from discrimination. So the idea that you should not be discriminated against. Now, again, these fundamental rights are not the only ones that are important, but they're ones that my research focuses on. And they are the ones that are very much, along with privacy, currently endangered by the metaverse. So we do see a lot of challenges here. Brief explanation, the freedom from discrimination means freedom from being discriminated against. That's perhaps a little bit obvious. You're not allowed to be discriminated against by the government, but also by other private parties. Freedom of opinion is something that's under current debate, especially online, is often misunderstood. So the freedom of opinion in general, especially in the EU, we say you have the freedom to express an opinion, but it doesn't mean that you're allowed to say everything. And the latter one is often forgotten, but hate speech, child pornography is not part of freedom of expression. But it is the idea that I'm allowed to say a political thing that you might disagree with, and that you say, well, I disagree with you because X, Y, Z. You're allowed to have your own opinions and express these in debate. Less well known is actually the freedom of thought. So this has actually been a fundamental right for over 10 years now, but it's never really been under discussion that much. And the reason is that we really weren't endangered as much in our thinking. But there are two different developments that have recently taken place. One is more on the physical aspect, so the actual reading of brain waves, but also in the aspect of AI. And I'm going to be talking about that a little bit more, but that is manipulation. So our thoughts are no longer as free as we think, but rather we are being manipulated into thinking a certain way through AI and even through subliminal AI. So AI, things that we cannot consciously see, but because our subconscious sees it, it can steer us to lead in a certain direction. So let's first of all start with the physical world. So I don't like to use real or fake world, but rather physical and virtual worlds. Now, when we talk about democratic discourse, we talk about in the physical world, usually through newspapers, through TVs, we have radios, we can have a public place where we can have protest, which in the Netherlands is generally at Malieveld, but also on local public squares, shopping malls. You have places where you can protest and express your opinion, talk to people, interact with them, and maybe change their minds. And that is something that we really expect of this public space, this public sphere, that we can interact with each other, that we can meet new people, we can meet new ideas, and we might agree with them, or we might say, well, no, respectfully, but I disagree with you because I think X, Y, Z, or in my experience has been that. And we have this debate. And the idea of this debate is that we then go, when we go for elections again, we can vote, we can say to our policymaker, this is what I want, I think this should have focus, not that. And we have this whole democratic sphere in which our rules, our legislation, our governance, and everything really comes together based on this public discourse idea. Now, of course, there are many, many nuances to be made. This is just a general idea underlying our democracy. And one of the things in the physical world is that we often, even though we have subjective experiences, we are confronted with other people's experiences too, and we are confronted with the same reality to a degree. So of course it makes a difference if I buy, say, newspaper 1 or newspaper 2. Some newspapers are very famous for discussing financial news, others are a bit more left, others are a bit more politically right-centered. But in general, we do see the same news. The 8 o'clock news is the same for everyone who watches it. So there is some sort of common reality. Now, why do I say this? Because it's different in the virtual world. And this is where the virtual worlds kind of become a danger to our democratic discourse. Because, well, let's start with the public space. It's slowly starting to disappear to a degree. Now, I hear some people thinking, well, hey, I just saw a video, that guy went to a bar, that's a public space. Yes and no. Yes, a bar is sometimes considered a public space in the sense that Habermas did say that in his time it was, of course, the saloons or the salons, sorry. That is a space where we can interact with each other, but it's not governed by public law. So if we look at the legal perspective, if you want to go to the Malieveld and demonstrate, the government can say, well, these are the safety norms. You have to do this, this, and this to make sure everything is safe, that in case of emergency you can evacuate, etc. But the government is not allowed to say, well, I disagree with your point of view, so you're not allowed to protest. Our law prohibits that type of reasoning. It says, government, you can only provide rules considering safety, traffic, so in general you're not allowed to protest on highways although indeed that has also some limitations, I do know. But in general, the government is not allowed to say, I disagree, so you're not allowed to protest. Now, why do I say public spaces are disappearing? As mentioned in the introduction by Annelieke and Hannah, well, the first world we saw was by Mark Zuckerberg. So it's part of the meta concern. In theory, that means it's not public. It is offered to you by a private party. So it's a company that offers that space, and therefore in most jurisdictions, including the European Union through the DSA, it means that the private platform is primarily responsible for the laws and the enforcement of the laws and terms of agreement. Meaning that if a private platform says, well, I don't want to hear this type of voice, to a degree they're allowed to do this. So there's still a little bit of confusion about the DSA. It does put some limits on platforms. So they're not allowed to promote. They actually have to take down illegal content the moment that they know of it. So then we're talking, say, enticement to hatred or to violence. They have to take all of that down. They have to respect fundamental rights. But whether that's at the same level as a government is currently very unclear. So in the past, we've actually seen, especially on Facebook, that freedom of speech was extremely limited. The same company that provides the Meta Horizon said in the past, well, we don't want in our platform any nudity. Okay, so far so good. But that included things like the image of the Little Mermaid of Hans Christian Andersen. You might be familiar with it. It's a kind of famous fairy tale, I could say. And there's a statue in Copenhagen, and that statue doesn't have a blouse on. So that was taken down. All right, that's already freedom of artistic expression that's being heard, but perhaps not so much political context. Then came down the takedown of the picture of the woman, the girl, who runs away from the napalm bombings after Vietnam. This is a very famous picture. It's something that's always used to discuss the horrors of war. How bad is war? And that picture usually pops up to show, well, war is really devastating for the people. It's not just about, you know, how much money goes where, it's about people being hurt. But that picture, if you're familiar with it, actually is of a girl who's not clothed, because even her skin is falling off due to the napalm. It's not a very pretty picture. That was taken down too, because, well, she was not clothed, so Meta or Facebook at the time considered it nudity. Legally, they're allowed to have these terms and expressions or terms of agreement where they limit such expressions. But it also severely limits how we have the discussions and debates with each other. We saw recently in the election, well, you know, on certain platforms like X, certain speeches were suppressed. So we saw that women were given less attention. The algorithm preferred the expressions of white, primarily Republican males, thus turning the debate into such a way that decreased the amount of freedom. Now, why is this a thing also in the metaverse, or why are we worried about it? Well, because it takes this problem and it's amplified even further. So if I asked you, let's say that we are all, very old discussion, but against the wearing of fur. Now, there used to be protests and everything. You're not allowed to protest in a shop. Makes sense, you know, it's a shop, they don't want protesters inside, maybe damage, maybe they want to sell their furs. Okay, makes sense. But if you want to visit that shop, you either have to go through the shopping street or through another street towards that shop. You are often allowed to protest outside of the shop. So even as a customer, even if you're not faced with that voice inside of the shop, you are confronted with it on your way to the shop. With the metaverse, as you saw with that man in the video as well, you put on your headset, you log in, you're there. You don't have to go through a public virtual shopping street to see the world that you're interested in. So you can actually lock out a lot of views. You can actually exclude certain protests. So that is one. We see the public space disappearing and actually being taken over by these private platforms. Another one is that they can be manipulated. So you saw a few bots also in that. The Santa Claus, that was a bot character. Now, if you think back, that Santa Claus, he had written the word bot underneath. But as an avatar, he looked exactly the same as the other avatars, except for the beard and the red pointy hat, of course. But he didn't look any different computer-wise. He looked as realistic. Now, as humans, we're programmed usually to agree with a majority opinion, or at least with a bigger opinion. The smaller voices we find a little bit harder to agree with from a psychological point of view. So if you're organizing a political rally and you see only 2 people there, you think, this politician is probably not that popular. I might not vote for him, or if he loses the election, I understand. With a virtual space, that same politician can be speaking there and you see all sorts of people, but they're all virtual. So how do you know if that is actually a virtual person operated by a real person or a physical person, or operated by a computer, operated by a bot? We don't really know. Now, there is some law about this. So the AI Act, recently introduced by the European Union, does tell us, well, if you're using a bot, it must be clear that it's a bot. Okay, lovely, great. What if the platform is not bound by the AI Act because it's not located or offering towards the EU? Or if it's too small to apply the AI Act? Or if it's just not applying it because it's doing things that it's not supposed to? Or if it's saying that's very small, that it's a bot? All of a sudden, we no longer know how popular is an idea. We can use bots to actually attack people, to say people who have political opinion A, let's attack their ideas. Let's tell them that they're wrong. Let's intimidate them through the use of bots. Now, we've already seen this at actual social media websites. So on the 2D sites, this is already a problem. X has a famous amount of bots being operated. In the metaverse, that's going to be an even bigger problem and a more realistic problem as well. So we already see some threats there. Bubbles. So we are usually living in social bubbles in the sense that we have relationships and groups with people who are somewhat similar to ourselves, but we are still confronted in daily life with people who are different. We see them on the bus, we see them in the gym, we see them in our classrooms. We do see people who are different. With Metaverse, you can very realistically be put into a bubble through an algorithm. So an algorithm that thinks, oh, hey, I want to make a profit. If you are put into a room with the people who think exactly the same as you, you're going to stay around much longer. So I'm going to put you in that room, or I'm going to put you around these people. And we don't always know that that is happening. So we know, okay, yeah, of course, we're determined by an algorithm to go somewhere, the same way we are on social media, certain feeds pop up, but we don't really realize the power of the algorithm and that not everyone has the same feed, that we are being manipulated into who we get in touch with and what kind of information we're confronted with. Now, to a large extent, that has to be done. The problem with these algorithms are that they're still focused on profit only, and profit usually means rabbit holes. Not, how do I make sure that everyone is confronted with a diverse amount of views so that they become more aware of other people's perspective? This is usually not how an algorithm operates. And the same with news. Any form of content is also shared through these algorithms. Now, what makes the metaverse even more special is that it's so immersive that it really feels like real life. And in real life, algorithms don't determine in what bubble we are either. So it becomes more and more realistic. And then we also see, like I said, the third one, freedom from discrimination. We see, well, there are new forms of discrimination rising. So when algorithms came up, now I think most people have heard in this room, I think, of the toeslagenaffaire in the Netherlands. We do know that algorithms can have a bias and that this bias can be quite severe. But with Metaverse, we see not just that an algorithm can be biased, but we see new forms of discrimination arising, namely digital skills. Not everyone has the same digital skills. There are groups in our society who have less digital skills. Think of people who are usually a little bit older. So not everybody who grows a little bit older also keeps familiar with technology. Now this one we're generally aware of, but another one is usually skills in reading. Reading levels as well determine how well your digital skills sometimes are. Think of eye capacity. How good are your eyes? And can you actually enter these virtual worlds and see what is going on? Think about other forms of, say, epilepsy. Can you enter a world, or will that actually be a world that triggers your epilepsy? These are new types of discrimination that we haven't really had to think about in the past, not to this level. Think about internet accessibility. Our net neutrality directive that actually organizes the accessibility to internet and that everybody is treated equally is from 2015. We didn't have to think about Metaverse and how much data that actually uses and how much internet you need to actually use this environment. At the same time, we see big tech companies coming up with a lot of power, and who's to say that in the future they won't buy or pay to have a premium service towards their customers? Who says that, or sometimes in some areas you don't always have the type of internet availability that is necessary to run these virtual worlds? These are all questions that we haven't really had to think about in the past, but that we are seeing now rising with this rise of Metaverse and virtual worlds. Deepfakes. It's been in the news quite a bit recently. It's super, super easy now to make a deepfake. So it used to be hard. It used to cost a lot of time and effort. So that's why movie studios could do it, but we as the people could not generally. Then it became a little bit easier. And now, well, recently I tried. It took me about 5 minutes to make a deepfake of one of my colleagues, which she found very humorous. And I, of course, deleted it off my computer. Don't worry. But if it takes 5 minutes and free software, everyone can do it. And we already saw in previous elections that deepfakes actually hurt the image that we have of a politician. Even when afterwards it said, well, this is a deepfake. Even when people watching it know this is a deepfake, it can still hurt their image. And yet it's super, super easy now to do it. And we do see it being shared. In virtual worlds, well, we can make avatars that look like ourselves, that look like others, that look very realistically like others, and we can make them do whatever we want, which can be politically bad, which can be illegal even. Is that slander? Is it not? How do we even check for it? We don't really know yet. And the same that we've seen is AI promoting or demoting content. So we saw that with the US elections as well, and whatever starts usually in the US flies over to Europe pretty fast, that AI algorithms, especially on certain platforms, promoted a certain political party over another political party, thus severely distorting the concept of how popular someone or a party is, which also undermines the results of an election. Not only are we manipulated, well, this is a lot more present, or this is a lot better, or deepfakes not being put down, but also can make people doubt, is this election true? Because I've not seen anyone online who votes for this, or who argues X, or Z, Y, or Z. which can even lead to violent events. We've seen that in the past with Capitol Hill, that elections were not believed, that people believed that election results were faked. And all of a sudden, we're no longer talking, but we're fighting with each other, which is not very desirable. So, a little bit more concretely to the law, we do have some laws against it. So, the EU has a digital agenda. Last slide. The EU has a digital agenda. Part of that is the Digital Services Act. And that's really, among others, aimed at addressing issues on platforms. So there is a little bit more required now about advertisement clarity. But then comes the question, what is advertisement? It's very easy if we say, well, I have a poster and I pay for you, platform, to show it. But does it also include an algorithm that decides I'm going to support political party A because I own this algorithm and I own this platform and I want to vote political party A? Not very clear. Well, they have the duty to remove illegal content, but what is illegal content? It's left to the member states. Deepfakes, is that illegal? Yes or no? When? There's a lot of unclarity there. And harmful content in particular is not included in the DSA. So there were some arguments to include it, but it was left out. So even though there are some increased duties, they're still quite limited. Another one is the AI Act, even more recent. Now, one in particular that I wanted to talk about a little bit is subliminal AI, because that is something that for the metaverse in theory can be very helpful. Because it does say that any type of AI that subliminally or uses subliminal techniques to influence and cause behavior that is harmful to ourselves or to others, that is not allowed. So these things that we can't consciously see, but we can subconsciously see, technically you're not allowed, it's prohibited AI. But then the question comes, well, what is subliminal? Can I manipulate avatars slightly so that certain religions are associated with certain bodily ratios, or that certain skin colors are perhaps moving a little slower as an avatar? Is that subliminal AI? Maybe, maybe not. What is harm? If I vote for a certain party that actually might not be in my interest, is that harmful? How do I know? Because after elections, all previous promises before the elections are forgotten anyway by every party, except those not in government. How do you demonstrate causality? How do you demonstrate the subliminal AI led to that harmful behavior? And more importantly, if we cannot consciously see that we're being manipulated, how are we to enforce it? And that's the question I'm going to leave you with. Thank you.
Thank you. Then I will introduce the second speaker. It's 𝙉ele van de Mosselaer. She's an assistant professor of philosophy here also in Tilburg at Tilburg University. And she will explain how we experience meaning in fictional and virtual worlds. So please give an applause for her.
Where's the clicker? All right. Yes. Indeed, I'm going to be talking about something slightly different, how we experience meaning in virtual worlds. And as you see on this slide, this is actually the outcome of a small project that I'm doing with Kathleen Murphy-Hollis from the University of Birmingham. Kathleen can sadly not be here, but I think it makes a lot of sense to start my presentation by explaining what exactly it is that she is researching. Kathleen, namely, is investigating conspiracy theories in people who believe in conspiracy theories. She is investigating how these people think, how they find meaning in the actual world, and just generally how they find kind of existential security in their believing in conspiracy theories. When Kathleen came to Tilburg and presented her research, I being a video game player, saw a lot of parallels between how people engage with conspiracy theories and how video game players actually find meaning in the virtual worlds they explore when playing video games. So in my presentation now, the goal is kind of to explain how people find meaning and experience meaning in virtual worlds by comparing them to people who believe in conspiracy theories. And I'm going to be focusing on three kind of aspects of this comparison, namely how people focus on intentionality, how they kind of see intentions behind certain events or things that happen within either the actual or the virtual world. How people tend to look for clarity. People don't like complexity, they don't like unclarity. They always seek to solve problems and to find clarity, either in the actual or the virtual world. And I will be focusing on the building of community around certain interpretation processes. People who interpret either the virtual or the actual world in similar fashion will form social groups very often. So let's start off with intentionality. Empirical research within conspiracy studies has shown that there are a lot of connections between people who believe in conspiracy theories and people who are prone to what is called hypersensitive agency detection. This basically means that these people are very prone to think that there is an agent behind anything that happens, right? There is always an intention. Nothing just happens. Nothing is a coincidence, right? There's always someone planning or designing situations. And as a conspiracy theorist, it is of course your goal to figure out who is designing things, who is planning everything behind the scenes. These people are also very prone to illusory pattern perception. This is of course very related, right? They see patterns everywhere, even though there is no pattern at all. They think certain things are caused by other things, while actually they are not related at all. Even in experiments with random coin tosses, these people often saw a pattern in how the coin would either fall heads or tails, which we know of course is just coincidental or random. And these people are often seeking meaning and existential security through finding these patterns, through uncovering which agents are responsible for certain situations. Because of course, if coincidence doesn't exist, then everything becomes more meaningful, because everything happens for a reason. And it's also way easier to feel secure in your exploring the actual world if you feel like you got it. You got what is happening behind the scene. You have a certain control over the situation if you know who is actually handling things. And relatedly as well, these people often have a narrative focus. Very often they also believe in urban legends, the supernatural or the paranormal. Because again, these are the kinds of stories in which there is a kind of unseen, an intentional force behind it all, right? That you can uncover. And if you know about this, you have gotten it. You have achieved some kind of clarity. Now, why am I talking about all of this here? This is, of course, because I see all of these kinds of behaviors in video game players as well, when they are interpreting virtual worlds. And to explain this, I want to take this example. This is a picture of a forest in the actual world, right? And what you see here is a beam of light hitting the forest floor in a very particular fashion. Now, in an actual forest, there is no one behind this. We have no reason to believe that somebody carefully planned for this beam of light to fall this way, right? We don't really perceive any agency or intention behind how the light is in this situation. So normally we have no reason to believe that this has special meaning. Of course, we can find it very beautiful, but we don't think we need to kind of interpret what is going on here. But now imagine that I told you that this is not a picture of an actual forest in the actual world, but I told you that this is a forest in a video game. In other words, this is a virtual forest. That means that what we are looking at here is an artifact. And with that, of course, I mean it is an object made by another human being, typically with cultural or historical interest, but most importantly, it has been made for us to explore. It has been made by someone who had a certain intention for us to see it. And now it becomes different when we are interpreting this situation. Because now we might be very prone to think that this has special meaning, this way that the light hits the forest floor. Because somebody designed it to be this way. So probably somebody meant to communicate something to us by having this beam be in this way. In video games, we might think that maybe there's treasure to be found and we have to go to that place that is marked by the light. Or maybe we start preparing for a boss fight because we think that is what is being signaled to us by this beam of light. So what video game players basically do is that they assume that there is an agent behind every situation that they see. There is literally an invisible force behind everything in the world, namely the game designer. And this, of course, guides our interpretation of virtual worlds. The fact that we know that they were made for us to experience in a certain way. And this can actually take on very extreme forms. What I'm referring to here is somewhere at the end of The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker, a game from 2003, players need to navigate a maze. But the maze is built up out of circular rooms that look exactly the same, and every room has 4 exits. Now, significant here is that there is only one exit that leads to the end of the maze. If you take any other 3, you get teleported back to the beginning of the maze. Now, like I said, it's a circular room. Every door looks exactly the same. So how do you figure out which door to take? Well, the game does something very funny, actually. In every room, there is an enemy called Phantom Ganon. And if you defeat Phantom Ganon, he drops his sword. And if he drops his sword, the sword wobbles for a while and then falls in a very specific direction. Here you can see it in-game. And in fact, the hilt of the sword always points to the right door. If you keep defeating the Phantom Ganons and always take the door that is pointed at by the hilt of the sword, you will get to the end of the maze and be able to escape it. Now think about how silly it would be to, in real life, let your actions be determined by how an object falls, right? But in a video game, this makes a lot of sense. In fact, you have to do it, otherwise you cannot finish the game. You will be stuck in the maze. So again, what we see here is that in virtual worlds, nothing just happens, right? Everything is a result of a deliberate agency, deliberate design, namely the design of the game designer. A second aspect of conspiracy thinking that is quite relevant in this regard as well is the fact that conspiracy theories tend to see the actual world as a puzzle. Like I said, they always want to achieve clarity. This also means that part of the attraction of conspiracy theories is that they are like a fun game, like a puzzle or a kind of murder mystery. We always want to figure out who has done it, right? So you already see that conspiracy theories by themselves are like games. And this is not just true for conspiracy theorists, of course. We all enjoy figuring it out. We all enjoy that aha moment where we achieve a clear explanation for something that we at first didn't quite understand. Again, I think the parallels with video game players and our interpretations of virtual worlds are very clear here. Namely, for example, you find a key in a video game. Obviously, you are going to interpret that as a call to action. If you find a key, that probably means that you have to find a door that this key fits on, because now you can open that door. Everything you encounter in a virtual world is seen as a kind of puzzle, something that you have to solve or use or do something with to achieve greater clarity in the world. That also means that every problem you encounter in a virtual world, such as this room, which at first seems inescapable, is seen as a kind of challenge. As somebody made this room for me, there must be a way for me to meaningfully interact with it. Otherwise, it's just a very bad game, right? So we kind of trust in the game designer to have given us a world that we can do something with, that we can find meaning in. This also means that we always assume that an aha moment or achieving clarity is possible. We always think that, of course, because complexity was designed, also clarity should have been designed in it for us to find. And this also means that players and any user of a virtual world tends to be very trustful in the designer, very tenacious in the way they approach these worlds or problems in this world, and very stubborn because they really believe that there must always be a solution. So they actually put a lot of effort into finding that solution. And a very funny consequence of this is that every problem in virtual worlds is by their users perceived as a solvable puzzle. And why is this funny? Because this leads to things like a decade-long, literally 10-year-long quest of users of a certain virtual world for the last secret of that world. I'm talking about players of the game Shadow of the Colossus. This is a game with a pretty big virtual world. And in this virtual world, somewhere, there is this massive door that you see here. It has signs engraved on it. And what was so interesting about this door is that nobody quite figured out how to open it. So, of course, players became obsessed with it. Because if there is a door in the virtual world, again, we assume that it's there for a reason. Somebody designed this door. So there must be a way to open it. It must be hiding something. So what players started to do is, and this is all detailed in Jacob Geller's YouTube video about this decade-long quest, they started to take to social media to try and figure out how to open this door, how to solve the last secret of this video game. This led to 562 pages of forum posts, of people suggesting ways to try stuff out in the virtual world and try to open this door. And they went very far. Somewhere on page 500, somebody says, look, we've had a lot of good theories in the past years, but did anybody try any of these strategies that we already discussed in their 14th playthrough of the game? Because maybe then it will work. So people went very far, again, very stubborn in trying to find a solution. Now, sadly for them, there was no secret at all. This door was actually just kind of an aesthetic thing in the virtual world to flesh out the virtual world. It was not interactive at all. It could not be opened. There was nothing behind it. The interesting thing is that, well, not only this shows the kind of tenacity that players have, sometimes, well, without good reason, but the interesting thing here is as well that even though there was no solution, these users still see this search as a kind of valuable thing they went through. And part of the reason for that is because they build a community of people who were trying to solve a puzzle together. And that in itself is, of course, also valuable. And that actually brings me to the third aspect that I want to discuss. Conspiracy theorists often form and defend their community or social group by kind of defending the same conspiracy theory. Conspiracy theories can meet social needs by creating and defending a community and a sense of belonging for the people who believe in it. And that also means that people kind of shape social groups by analyzing puzzles together. And a typical example of this is, for example, members of QAnon on 4chan trying to analyze Trump's speeches on chat boards because they are convinced that Q kind of dropped hints in there about what is actually going on behind the scenes, and they believe that they need to uncover these secrets, right? In the meantime, of course, they are forming a social group around this idea, around this kind of conspiracy. But like I said, video game players do something very similar when it comes to interpreting virtual worlds. I already gave the example of Shadow of the Colossus in the last secret that should have been there. But very often, and that is noteworthy, games are designed as community puzzles. Games are designed in a way that they need to be interpreted together to actually be able to understand the virtual worlds. And an example that I want to discuss in this regard is Animal Well, published by Big Mode. Animal Well is a single-player game. You just play it by yourself, it features a lot of puzzles, and one of the puzzles in the vast world of Animal Well is this one. Players just happen upon a drawing of a rabbit, and they kind of recognize it already as a puzzle, right? And indeed, when they look on in this very same room, they find this kind of secret part of the room where they can have this kind of interface to change the drawing of the rabbit. They can change the little squares to blue, red, or yellow. So there seemed to be something to do here. But of course, players didn't know what to change the drawing to. So they kept looking, and they found another secret room below this one. And in this room, they found this. It's a kind of grid, 4x4, that features what seems to be part of the drawing that they have to draw in the room above. Again, though, players were stuck, because this only gives you a grid of 4x4, the drawing is much larger, so they still didn't know what to draw at all. And that's when they took to social media to try to figure this out together. And what they discovered was that a lot of different players get different grids in their game. In fact, every player only gets one grid that they need to finish the puzzle out of 50 total squares that you need. And that's when it got interesting, of course, because they started working together. They needed at least 50 people for this. What you see here is people on social media who are sharing what they have found in their game, all the pieces of the puzzle to solve this puzzle in the game. Once they had collected all 50, they could actually start puzzling these pieces together to see what drawing they had to create in the game. And that is, of course, how they eventually succeeded in solving the puzzle. And this is the drawing that they found, drew in the game, and got the achievement for. Now, this already shows how you can have these kinds of communal processes of interpretation in and about games. The example I just gave features people thinking together about the mechanics of a game, right? About the gameplay, how to solve puzzles. But you can have the same kind of interpretation processes regarding a game's story, for example. Bloodborne is a game that is famously hard to interpret. Like, it's very hard to actually know why the characters are doing the things that they are doing or what is actually going on in the game world at all, because the story is very implicit in this game. It's just hinted at in item descriptions and you have to piece it together. So, of course, also the ideal game to motivate this kind of communal interpretation. And that's, again, exactly what happened. Many Reddit discussions eventually led to the publication of the Pale Blood Hunt by Reddit user Redgrave. What we have here is truly a book, 107 pages, detailing the fictional history of the game Bloodborne, or the game world of Bloodborne. Again, the outcome of a community working together to try and understand a virtual world. So what we have now is these clear kind of parallels between conspiracy theorists and video game players. Both have a focus on intentionality. They assume that unseen forces are behind events within the actual or the virtual world. They strive towards clarity or the aha moment. They perceive everything as a puzzle that they can solve, and they form communities. They build and strengthen social bonds through these kinds of communal interpretation processes. Now, to end my presentation, I want to focus on, okay, what can we take away from this, right? Why have I told you about all of this? So, one takeaway, I think, is the kind of value that the conspiracy attitude might have. This is a bit counterintuitive, of course, because normally we would say, don't have this kind of attitude, it's not correct. But in fact, what we see is that when interpreting reality or the actual world, conspiracy theorists use strategies that are very similar to the ones that we use to interpret fictional or virtual worlds. And by themselves, these strategies are actually very valuable and very fun for us. And the reason for this is, of course, well, because they fulfill certain needs that we have. They let us experience thinking, tenacity, communal effort, achieving clarity. These are all things that we all strive towards, not just conspiracy theorists or video game players, right? So virtual worlds really fulfill needs that many of us have. Virtual worlds are designed for us to find clarity, are giving us a certain purpose. You have a goal when you play a game, right? There are side quests that you can fulfill. There is the game that you can finish. And they give us the promise of certainty. There will be a point where you have experienced the entire game, where you have finished it, where you have overcome all puzzles and all bosses in the game. So they provide us with all of that, which is actually valuable in itself, which is exactly something that conspiracy theorists also fulfill by other means in the actual world instead of in virtual worlds. Now, just to close off, I want to have a slight glimpse at the future of virtual worlds, because I've been saying a lot about how they offer us clarity, but it is also true that virtual worlds are evolving. Actually, they are becoming more and more complex. They are becoming more and more like the actual world. And that might not always be a good thing. For example, take the world of a very recent published game, Assassin's Creed Shadows. This game features a virtual world that is enormous, very vast, many details, very realistic and very complete. That means it gives us a lot of information, a lot of possibilities for interaction. But that also means that this world is much less clear. It's so complex, features so much uncertainty that it's actually harder to navigate than those virtual worlds that are much more focused and small. In fact, I saw one of my favorite video game streamers, Vacker Gaming, make a YouTube video about her journey to get all the achievements in Assassin's Creed Shadows. And normally, games make this quite easy, right? They give you clear goals. This is what you need to do. And, ooh, that's a shame. Okay. And this is where you need to go to finish that quest. And the funny thing is, Vacker Gaming got a bit frustrated in the YouTube video because Assassin's Creed Shadows doesn't feature those quest markers at all. It doesn't clearly tell you, hey, here's the person you need to find to finish this quest. In fact, it just says, this person is somewhere in this city, and you have to truly navigate the entire world and explore it to find this person. That's very realistic. That's what we would have to do in the actual world, right? But Vacker Gaming was frustrated because the world wasn't offering the kind of clarity that we have come to expect from virtual worlds. We expect them to have these kind of clear goals, clear navigational markers. And Assassin's Creed Shadows, for the sake of realism and completeness, doesn't do that. And that's actually making it harder for us to interact with them in a meaningful way. Something very similar goes on when we have procedural generation in virtual worlds. That means that certain parts of the world are only generated when we play them. Or artificially intelligent characters in virtual worlds. That means that the designers didn't quite plan all the behaviors of the characters in the game, but they just planned a few rules that these characters follow, and then these characters just do things based on your interactions with them, for example. Characters might do things that the designer didn't actually plan for. And these things might reintroduce coincidence in virtual worlds. To return to an example that I discussed earlier, imagine that a beam of light hits a certain part of the world of Assassin's Creed Shadows. Would players still tend to think that this is meaningful, that they need to go there? Not necessarily. Maybe this just means that the designers have very realistically planned the movement of clouds in this game and the movement of the sun relative to the game world. And this is just a coincidental consequence of the movement of the clouds and the light source in the game. Not necessarily by itself meaningful at all. So what we see is that when virtual worlds become more like the real world, there might be a loss of meaning. Meaning that virtual worlds had by the fact that they were artifacts, by the fact that they were carefully designed by someone. Because now, with the introduction of more realism, more completeness, procedural generation, and more complex AI, maybe some things are just coincidence. And maybe we have virtual world now in which shit just happens. Thank you.
Then I will introduce the last speaker. It's Sunimal Mendis. She is an assistant professor in intellectual property law, and she will explore how copyright and freedom of expression work in digital spaces. So please an applause for her as well.
Hello, everyone. Great to be here. I just got out of a very long lecture, which makes me feel a bit tired, so I'm going to sit down, at least for the moment. So I am an assistant professor in copyright law at the Tilburg Institute for Law, Technology and Society, that we like to call TILT. And my research is, a lot of it is on platform regulation and specifically copyright and the freedom of expression. So today, as you see, my topic is how this interface between copyright and the freedom of expression can play out in virtual public spaces. And I will be developing on what Annelieke and 𝙉ele has already discussed in my talk. So let's take a look at what I mean by virtual public spaces. And here I come to the public sphere. Now, before we go on to the digital public sphere, let's first think about what we mean by the public sphere. So the public sphere is a concept that was developed by Jürgen Habermas, a German philosopher in the 1960s. And his notion of the public sphere refers to spaces and infrastructures that are open to the public, where the public can come together to engage in what he termed democratic discourse. So democratic discourse refers to rational, critical citizen discourse that is autonomous from state and corporate power, and this rational, critical citizen discourse enables the development of public opinion, which can then guide the democratic process. So safeguarding such rational, critical citizen discourse that is autonomous from the influence or control or manipulation by the state or from corporate power, this is very important for safeguarding the democratic process and advancing the democratic process. Which is why countries such as the Netherlands that value the democratic process and they want to foster this, they place a lot of emphasis on ensuring that there are sufficient opportunities for the public to engage in democratic discourse. And one of the ways of safeguarding democratic discourse and the opportunities of citizens to participate in democratic discourse is by safeguarding the fundamental right to freedom of expression. Okay? So, in the traditional world, when Habermas came up with this notion, the public sphere related to physical public spaces such as parks, town halls, shopping malls, sports arenas, etc., and of course, traditional media, the legacy media. And I think Annelieke also touched on this. So television, print media, radios. These were all spaces, infrastructures that allowed for this democratic discourse to take place. And of course, the traditional public sphere is territorially bounded. Okay? So the physical spaces, of course, they are situated in a specific territory, and therefore they come under the laws and rules of that land. So if you take a public park that is owned by the municipality, for instance, this is of course a publicly owned physical space. It falls within the laws and rules of the country and is also subject to a certain administrative rules by which the municipality is bound by in determining how people can interact in that public space. If you take something like a shopping mall, of course, the shopping mall might be subject to private ownership by a private party, but if this is accessible to the public, that also means there are certain rules and regulations by which the owner of that public space is bound, which also prevents them from unduly exercising their discretion in a way that can undermine the freedom of expression of the people who use that shopping mall. For instance, in certain jurisdictions, privately owned spaces that are accessible to the public can be categorized as semi-public spaces, in which case certain special rules can apply to that. And these rules will also be aimed at protecting people's freedom of expression. Even if you take media, such as television, print media, radio, these will also be territorially bounded in the sense that if you want to have a television channel or a radio channel, then you have to obtain a license from the government, and then you become bound by certain rules. Newspapers, even if you don't need to take a license, there will be certain authorities that regulate you, that oversee the way in which you use that medium and to make sure that democratic discourse is allowed. Now, the fact that the traditional public sphere is territorially bounded can have advantages and disadvantages to freedom of expression. As I said, of course, the laws and rules of the land apply to these spaces, and usually in democratic countries, these laws and rules are geared towards safeguarding the freedom of expression of the public. But this also means that sometimes government control can be used in a way that actually limits the freedom of expression of people. So, for instance, if there is a sort of art festival in that municipal park, this is a protest art festival, and the municipality can just decide to shut down the park, or it can use other strategies to limit the kind of people who are able to attend it. For instance, if there is an artist who is coming from a different country that the government doesn't want to allow into that festival, they can just refuse the visa and make sure that person cannot come. So it has advantages and disadvantages, but that's the traditional public sphere. Now we have the digital public sphere, right? And of course, first we had social media platforms like Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, etc., 2D spaces. But now we are seeing the emergence of virtual spaces, right? These are fully immersive environments where people can engage in social political, cultural interaction, very similar to the traditional public sphere because they allow for multimodal interaction, unlike the 2D spaces. So not just via the sharing of text or audiovisual content, but also via actual interaction through avatars, for instance, where they can also use movement, gesture, facial expression, all of that. Very similar to the physical world. But of course, the virtual public sphere is not territorially bounded. That means, for instance, that there is more freedom, at least in theory. It is possible for these spaces to become more inclusive, more open than the traditional public sphere, because now participation is not limited by territorial boundaries. People from all different parts of the world can come together to interact at a much larger scale than is possible in the traditional public sphere. On the other hand, this transnational character, of course, means it's much more difficult to regulate these via the laws that apply to certain territories, the law of the EU, for instance. It's very difficult for EU law to efficiently govern virtual public spaces, as we shall see. On the other hand, unlike the traditional public sphere, where there are spaces that are the subject of public ownership or state ownership, like the municipal parks, where people can actually have an entitlement to use that by being part of the populace. Virtual public sphere, the spaces are predominantly owned by private corporates or tech giants who are located in certain geographic parts of the world, so US and China. And this can also have consequences for protecting the freedom of expression on these spaces, because these spaces are governed by contractual terms of service that are determined by the private parties who own these platforms, also through community norms that are framed by users. So this again depends on what kind of users use this platform. And this private governance can sometimes come into conflict with the laws that are determined by governments around the world. And when that conflict happens, it's very difficult to determine how you can actually make sure that the freedom of expression is safeguarded. All right. So let's now get to copyright. Sorry. So you may have heard a lot of things about copyright, and usually that copyright is seen as an instrument that favors large corporates by creating exclusivity in creative expression. But that is one way of looking at copyright. And now there are democratic theories of copyright emerging, which see that copyright's overarching purpose is not just to
incentivize creation by making sure that people who create content will be able to monetize that content, but it has a further purpose of making sure that members of the public are able to access that content and engage and reinterpret and reuse that content in socially valuable ways that can finally lead to the promotion of democratic discourse. So copyright's task is not just to ensure that there is enough content being created and supplied to the market, but it also needs to make sure that the public are able to actually get the maximum benefits of this creative content by being able to use it in a way that advances their freedom of expression, advances their creativity, and to basically broaden their understanding of the world through a sharing of experience, and that this will ultimately lead to the promotion of democratic discourse. And achieving this overarching purpose of promoting democratic discourse via copyright requires a very fair balance to be maintained between the legitimate rights and interests of the people who create the expression and the legitimate rights and interest of the users to engage and use and interpret this content in a socially valuable way. So that is copyright's fair balance. And that balance is usually achieved by copyright laws, by the legislatures in how they frame the laws, and also by the courts in terms of how they interpret the laws. And a very important mechanism for safeguarding this fair balance are exceptions and limitations to copyright. So of course, copyright grants exclusive rights to creators, which means that if a work is protected by copyright, if a book is protected by copyright, you can't just make copies of that book and sell it without the author's permission. There are usually use of that book requires the authorization, but there are exceptions to that exclusive right. Certain uses that the public can make of the copyright protected work that does not require the authorization of the copyright owner. And two of these exceptions are very important for safeguarding the freedom of expression of the public by enabling them to reuse and reinterpret this content in a socially valuable way that can ultimately achieve the goal of promoting democratic discourse. The first exception is the use of copyright protected content for the purpose or quotation, small parts of copyright protected content for purposes of criticism or review. And the second is the use of copyright protected content for the purpose of creating caricatures, parodies, or pastiche. Okay? So this is a parody of the Marlboro ad. So you've seen the Marlboro ad, I'm sure. It's the cowboy with the horse that evokes an idea of freedom, of virility. And this is a parody of the Marlboro country ad, where now, of course, the cowboy is dead, probably from lung cancer, and the horse is looking very sad. And that allows the public, through the creation of these parodies, to comment on these commercial narratives, for instance. On YouTube, there are many mashups, remixes of copyright-protected content, such as speeches or other clips from which show the behavior of politicians. And these, again, are a way of transforming that original copyright content for the purpose of engaging in a discourse with that content and for commenting on certain important political narratives. So because of this, the ability for users to use existing copyright protected content on the internet for the purpose of engaging in such cultural or social or political commentary is considered to be extremely important for the freedom of expression, which is why it's so important to make sure that this freedom continues to be safeguarded and fostered in the virtual public sphere as well. So, let me just illustrate the problem or the risks to the freedom of expression and safeguarding this delicate balance between copyright and the freedom of expression in public spaces with regard to a real-life example. So I'm sure you know about this raging bull statue that is placed in New York, in Wall Street. It's a public square in Wall Street. And the raging bull statue was created by an artist as a symbol of capitalist power, optimism in financial markets, etc. Now, around 2017, another artist created this statue, which is called the Fearless Girl. It's a girl with her hands on her hips, standing very defiantly in front of the bull. And this was meant to be a symbol of feminist power in male-dominated financial markets. Okay? Now, the person, the artist who created the raging bull, objected to the Fearless Girl statue being placed in front of the bull, because the artist claimed that this subverted the artistic message he wished to convey via the raging bull. The artist said the raging bull is supposed to convey a very positive message of optimism, of capitalist power, but by placing this other statue, the Fearless Girl, in front of the bull, now the bull has become a symbol of misogyny, of male dominance, and that's bad. And he claimed that because of that, the Fearless Girl statue being placed in front of the raging bull infringed on his moral right to integrity in the work, which is a right granted under copyright. Okay? So that is very interesting. Now here, somebody is trying to comment or critique the issue of these of the financial world being male-dominated, of women not having equality or same levels of power, and they're doing that in an artistic way by creating another statue, which can also be considered as a parody. But copyright is being invoked in order to prevent that discussion from taking place. Right? And people, and now the Fearless Girl was placed to critique the raging bull, but people also started critiquing the Fearless Girl as well, in ways that the artist who created that statue didn't like very much, right? So you see how important it is to allow members of the public to engage with these creative content, especially the ones that are placed in public spaces, because that can become a very important form of expression and of public discourse. Now, because this happened in a public square that was owned by the municipality or the town council, of course, the decision, how this dispute could be resolved, first this would have gone to the town council, right? The artist would have asked the town council, please remove the Fearless Girl from the vicinity of my bull. And the municipality, of course, may have considered the merits of the case, but the municipality as a government body is also bound by fundamental rights duties, by due process, accountability, etc. So whatever decision they would have given to this dispute would have had to follow and take into account all these interests. And if the artist was not happy with that decision, then the final power to determine would have been with the court based on the US Constitution, other applicable rules, right? Which includes fundamental rights. Now, I will not go to how this specific dispute was settled in the real world because it's a very complicated thing, but I wanted to provide this as an illustration as to the importance of achieving this fair balance between copyright and freedom of expression in public spaces, and the importance of ensuring that the body, the entity who has the authority to determine this dispute is an entity that has legitimacy and capacity to also make sure that the fair balance between copyright and freedom of expression is preserved in a way that can contribute to copyright's overarching purpose of fostering democratic discourse in the public sphere. Now, let's transfer this to the virtual public sphere. Imagine that this whole saga took place in Decentraland, for instance. Somebody created this virtual statue of a bull, okay, and it was meant to convey this optimism in financial markets, and then somebody else put the other statue of the fearless girl. Now there's this whole dispute. This infringes my moral right to integrity, which is a right granted under copyright. Now here, who will get to decide the fair balance, right? At first instance, because Decentraland is owned by a private corporate, it is the private corporate who will get to decide whether the fearless girl statue should be allowed to remain, because here the fair balance requires that statue to the rights of the person who created that statue to engage in discourse with the statue, or whether this actually infringes on the legitimate rights and interests of the creator of the Raging Bull statue. It does not fall within the parody exception, and therefore the fearless girl has to be removed. Now, in determining this dispute, the platform owner, of course, will have to take into account certain applicable laws, but the platform owner as a private entity is not bound by fundamental rights obligations, not required to really take into account the freedom of expression in determining this dispute. And also the platform owner will not just be taking into account the laws of the land. The platform owner will also be taking into account his own contractual terms of service that he has imposed on people who use this platform. He will take into account the wishes of the community. So if the community is not happy with the fearless girl, then there is a higher chance that the fearless girl statue will be removed. And also, of course, the platform owner might have their own ideologies and agendas, right? Perhaps the platform owner doesn't like these feminist narratives and doesn't think that his platform should be used for discourse that promotes this kind of narrative. Of course, if one of the parties is not happy with that decision of the platform owner, there is a possibility, for that party to go to court. But the reality we see in most online platforms is that because of these issues, with the territorial control, the fact that one party might be living in one country, the other in another country, people don't always take these disputes to court. Once the platform has decided and the platform has removed the content, most of the time they don't proceed to courts. So for all intents and purposes, then most of the time it is the decision of the platform owner that will prevail. And because of that, there is a lot of risk of the freedom of expression being undermined, that this fair balance in copyright is not really achieved because the platform owner engages in abuse of power or the wrongful application of the power and discretion he has or she has in moderating the content and moderating and controlling the behavior of users on their platforms. And this is very important because since now the public is shifting more and more towards virtual public spaces, that means the public is subjecting themselves more and more to this discretion, this power of private corporate entities. And that also has far-reaching consequences because it can have what we call a norm-setting function. Based on what these platforms see as legitimate speech or wrongful speech, we can also change our ideas of what is legitimate speech, what is wrongful speech, what is correct behavior, what is incorrect behavior. And there is a higher risk that these will become shaped not by the laws of the country we live in or our societies, as is usually the case, but by the visions and narratives that are favored by the people who own these spaces. And there are many instances when platforms have got it wrong in moderating content. Buffy versus Edwards, this is a commentary and also a parody of I think the TV series called Twilight, which was about vampires, and somebody created this video as a way of critiquing a certain character in that TV series, who the person engaging in the critique saw as being misogynist and promoting harmful or toxic attitudes in relation to women. And this video, Buffy versus Edwards, this parody, it was seen as such a powerful form of transformative storytelling that it was used in courses or on gender studies or media studies in universities as well. But the people who had copyright in the Twilight TV series, they complained to YouTube and said that this video includes parts of their copyrighted content that has been used without authorization, and asked for this video to be taken down. And YouTube did that. And it was after a lot of outrage on the part of users and the public that YouTube acknowledged that, yes, we got it wrong. This is indeed a fair use, because under US law, even under EU law, this is very clearly a parody. And they reinstated it. But of course, this video was lucky, because people mobilized and people started protesting. And that is ultimately what led YouTube to reconsider their decision. But we cannot expect this to happen with regard to every piece of content, right? Pepe the Frog, you must be knowing Pepe the Frog, a very popular kind of character, meme. But now it has been appropriated to a large extent by racists and has become a racist symbol. And platforms have allowed this to happen as well, right? So we don't know the reason for this. Maybe they thought that was freedom of expression and they got the balance wrong, but still it has happened. And so and to illustrate the fact that a lot can depend on the personal agendas and ideologies of the platform owners, you see that Elon Musk reinstated Donald Trump after Donald Trump was banned from Twitter for engaging in what Twitter considered was harmful speech, right? Of course, Elon Musk claimed that this was done following a poll where he asked users of Twitter or X, should Donald Trump be reinstated? But later on, Musk also acknowledged that a lot of bots have been voting in this poll. So we again see manipulation happening. So that is the end of my very brief outline into this issue. I would just like to leave you with some food for thought, which is that Europe has been trying very hard to regulate these platforms in a way that can adequately safeguard freedom of expression of the public, while also giving due protection to the legitimate rights and interests of copyright owners. I don't say Europe got it wrong, but at least it was trying to get on the right path towards ensuring that these spaces are protected, they're accessible. But now there is a lot of backlash from the tech giants based in the US, who feel that this digital regulation is unfair, that it burdens them, it imposes more liability on these platforms than what they deserve. So the question then for us is, how can the EU protect itself, its people, and democracy from these digital oligarchs? So at universities, of course, we are trying our best to resist the influence coming from these tech giants by working with people who make policy and law, by creating awareness through these kinds of events. But it's really the people who need to step up and resist this sort of corporate overreach and corporate capture. And we saw this when, for instance, the US tried to ban TikTok. A lot of the users in the US, although this was, well, ostentatiously done to protect the data and the privacy of users, the users who were not aware of the dangers, they resisted this and they said, we don't care if our data is taken, we want our TikTok. So if the public are not aware of the risks to their rights and freedoms, then it's very difficult for governments to do anything either. So I just wanted to leave you with that. Thank you.
Thank you, Sunima. Are there any questions still? No questions? No? Then I think it's also already time, so thank you. Thanks. So I think we can end here. What I would like to ask you is to fill in this small 1-minute survey. It really helps us also to hear from you what you thought of this event, and if you also have any suggestions still, please fill in the form. You can leave your comments there. And even though we were with a really small group today, I hope you still enjoyed these great presentations, and I wish you a nice rest of the day. So thank you.